So by the end of this video, I want you to know exactly what to do with your money every time you get paid. Your payday is a crucial day to get your money set up and working for you the right way. But there's so many different choices to make, and it can be overwhelming. For many of us, payday comes every 2 weeks, or if you're a freelancer or just don't have a consistent income to rely upon, you may not get paydays that often. Either way, the following strategy will set you up for success. All right, first step, save for retirement. This step actually happens before you get paid, so let's start here. You might have the choice to withhold a portion of your paycheck to set aside in your 401k or some kind of company retirement fund, right? If you work for a job that offers a 401k, consider setting your withholding to 10% and then don't decrease it from there. I know that sounds like a lot, but hear me out. You might be surprised at how quickly you forget about the income you no longer see in each payday. If your employer has an employer match, absolutely contribute to that because that's free money. Now, I get it, trust me. When you're in your 20s and your 30s, retirement seems super far away, and you just don't feel the need to worry about it just yet. Retirement is not top of mind right when you get paid. However, ask anyone that's nearing retirement, and I bet you they'll tell you that they wish they had more retirement savings to rely upon. Now, no one wants to downgrade their lives when they stop working, right, and they're ready for retirement. You want to set yourself up to travel more or spend time enjoying the limited amount of time we actually have here on this planet. And for many of us, our 20s are also when we have the fewest financial obligations and expenses. Try to take advantage of the time you have ahead of you by starting earlier. The earlier you start, the more time your retirement savings and investments have to compound. And compounding is huge for your retirement savings. To put this into perspective, say you make $80K per year, and we assume your federal and state tax and withholdings totals about 30%. So each paycheck after tax ends up being about $2,333. Meaning that's exactly what you see hit your bank account every other week. If you withhold 10% of your paycheck pre-tax into your 401k, assuming the same 30% federal and state tax brackets, you'll get paid $2,042 each payday. That's only $291 less each paycheck, but adds up to an additional $8,000 in 401k savings each year because that 10% withholding is taken pre-tax. If you factor the power of compounding in here, this can really add up over 40 plus years. When it comes to retirement, time is the biggest factor. The earlier you can start, the better. All right, enough said. Next, set aside the necessary or fixed expenses. We all call these the needs, right? Once the cash arrives in your bank account, you need to make sure that you take care of your immediate needs first. This is your food, this is your shelter, transportation, healthcare, utilities. These things allow you to live your life in a reasonable manner. You don't need that nice dinner out, right? But you do need to have enough money to just buy groceries for the following week. I like to have multiple bank accounts so I don't just leave all of my paychecks sitting right there in my main account. In my opinion, most people will spend the money if you see it every day just sitting in the same account. However, for this purpose, you should leave the amount of money that covers these necessities in your main account if that's what you use for these expenses. Calculate the amount that you need to cover these expenses for the next month or so, and then don't let your cash balance go below that threshold. If you're having trouble estimating that number, just make a conservative estimate and add a little cushion to your monthly savings here. This step is key to avoiding debt in the future. All right, next. Once you set aside the monthly expenses in step number 2, you need to set aside that emergency fund as well. Now, emergency fund, we talk about it a lot. This is money set aside in cash to cover unexpected expenses before allocating money for anything else. An emergency fund is cash savings, not investments, that can be accessed immediately if you lose your job or experience some kind of a large expense, right? You want this liquid and easily accessible, and it will ideally keep you out of debt if you face more large expenses down the road. Even the most careful planners can lose their job or experience some kind of unusual healthcare costs that put them in a tight financial position. So to figure out this number for your emergency savings, total up what you spend in an average month. Multiply that number by at least 3. I suggest 6 to be safe, and then use that as your starting point. This way, you won't need to put that expense on a credit card, for example, that you then can't pay off and then leads you into credit card debt. Ideally, you should pick an account that earns more interest than what you'd get in your standard checking account. Next, focus on paying off debt. So once you've set aside your retirement savings, you set aside your monthly expenses, then you get that emergency fund set up, you need to focus on the debt. Most of us think about credit card debt when we say debt, but really, debt comes in many forms, and it's important to understand each type and how it impacts you. I like to organize it by interest rate, starting with the highest rate first, then decide how I want to pay down that debt from there. This method is called the avalanche method, and it's a pretty commonly used method, right? Credit card debt is typically the highest interest rate of all kinds of debts. The key here is that you only actually pay interest on credit card debt if you don't pay off your balance each month. So if you're paying it off in full each month, then you never have to actually worry about paying interest and you won't build up credit card debt. But let's say you get in a bind and you spend a little too much one month and then it carries over that balance the next month and all of a sudden you're thousands of dollars in credit card debt. We've all been there. I have. If you carry any credit card debt, start by paying this off first. This does not mean you should just ignore the rest of your debts. I'm not saying that. Instead, you want to contribute to make the regular payments on all the other debts, but now prioritize that credit card debt a little bit more. After credit card debt comes any other high interest debt like personal loans or any debt consolidation loans. I'd consider any rate over 6 or 7% as a high interest rate, and these typically fall into that category. You should prioritize making extra payments on these types of loans to take care of these after your credit card debt. Next, we can focus on the lower interest rate debt like student loans, auto loans, or even your mortgage if you own a home. If you have any extra cash, take chunks off the principal balance on any of these types of loans after taking care of the high interest debt. Don't prioritize the low interest debt over the high interest debt, but instead, just use what's left over to take these on. Set your priorities there. If you have any debt that's a really low interest rate, which I'd consider anything below 4% or say, you may not actually want to prioritize that first. You may consider just making the normal payments there and then moving on to the next step, which is investing. All right, so investing. This is where you can start to really build your wealth long-term by making your money work for you. The average annual return from a globally diversified portfolio over, let's say, the last 50 years is right around 8% or so. So you can use that as your benchmark. If you compare the rate you're paying on debt to the rate you might expect long-term from investing, for some people, it might make more sense to choose investing over that paying off that debt. For example, if you have a student loan charging 3%, but you can then put your savings to work by investing it and making at least double that, you might consider investing instead of taking chunks off your student loan. However, if you have credit card debt that's charging you 20%, you're not going to beat that investing. We have more videos on deciding between paying off debt or investing. I'll link those below. While we're at it, hit the subscribe button. When thinking about what to invest in, for younger investors, it just makes more sense to have the majority of your investments and the majority of your net worth in low-cost ETFs broadly diversified across the global market. So if you want to take on more risk and buy some cryptocurrency or individual stocks, I get it, that totally makes sense. Just make sure that you understand beforehand that the more you veer away, the more you steer away from the diversified low-cost investments, which is, the kind of the classic model of investing, the higher chance you have to lose money. Investing is all about understanding the risk versus reward, and no two people have the same relationship with risk and reward. With investing, quite possibly the biggest factor here is time. The younger you are, the more time you have to let your investments compound and grow. Don't put off investing your extra savings until next week or next month. We've all been there. Every day you sit on the sidelines, you might miss out on some long-term returns. You also want to factor in the type of investment account, as there are quite a few to choose from. It can be overwhelming as well. If you make under the IRS income limit of, let's say, $129K in 2022, you can consider taking advantage of the Roth IRA. You can contribute up to $6,000 each year into the Roth IRA, and then your investments grow tax-free. And if you wait till you're 59 and a half to withdraw these funds, you won't owe any taxes whatsoever. But if you need to withdraw them any sooner, you're never taxed on your contributions that you put in. And there's also a lot of exceptions to avoiding taxes on the gains as well. For example, buying a home. It can be a great resource for younger investors still eligible under that income limit to contribute to and build their wealth long term. If you can max out your Roth IRA contributions and still have extra savings left to invest in, then you want to consider investing in just a standard taxable brokerage account. There aren't any tax advantages to this type of account, but there are also not type of any restrictions when it comes to withdrawing your funds. So there's a little bit more flexibility there. You can use this type of account to save for that future home or just more general way to build wealth outside of those retirement accounts. You should just consider how far in the future you may need these funds. If it's not within the next 3 years, your funds should always be invested. The reason is that any savings sitting in cash that's not likely to be used in the next few years is just losing buying power to inflation. You want to get funds that you don't need in the next few years invested in a globally diversified portfolio. Time is on your side here. Use it to your advantage and get started early so you can then let the compounding do the work for you. I'm Tony from Wealthfront. Hit that subscribe button and share this with a friend. Thanks so much for joining. I hope this helps.